In the first 60 minutes of a renewed conflict on the Korean peninsula, before a single American boot touches the ground or a single tank crosses the 38th parallel, the casualty models predict a number that modern warfare has never seen: 200,000 dead. That is not a worst-case scenario projected by alarmists. That is the conservative baseline derived from the density of artillery currently aimed at the Seoul metropolitan area. In the time it takes to watch a standard movie, an entire generation of civilians would be erased by conventional munitions alone. We often speak of invasion as a matter of strategy, technology, and will, but in North Korea, the defense is not built on winning battles. It is built on a mathematical equation of devastation so high that the invasion can never begin in the first place. You're watching Power Explained, where the calculus of war is absolute. If you value this depth of analysis, subscribing ensures you don't miss the next investigation into the mechanics of global power. To understand why an invasion of North Korea is logically impossible, we must first strip away the common perception of the North Korean military. Western media frequently portrays the Korean People's Army as a rusted relic of the Cold War, a starving force equipped with trucks that barely run and jets that belong in museums. While there is truth to the technological obsolescence, this assessment commits a fatal error in military logic. It assumes the war will be fought on terms favorable to a modern, maneuver-based military like the United States. It assumes a war of movement, but North Korea has spent 70 years turning its entire geography into a static kill box where movement is the enemy. The primary deterrent is not the nuclear weapon, though that dominates the headlines. The true deterrent is the tyranny of geography and the weaponization of geology. The Korean peninsula is roughly 70% mountainous. Unlike the flat, open deserts of Iraq where the United States showcased its dominance in 1991 and 2003, Korea is a vertical nightmare. In Desert Storm, American forces could leverage superior range and sensors to destroy Iraqi tanks from miles away because there was nowhere to hide. The desert is an ocean of sand. Korea is a labyrinth of granite. If an invasion force were to attempt a ground incursion, they would not be sweeping across open plains. They would be channeled into narrow valleys and mountain passes. These are natural choke points. In military logistics, a choke point is a death sentence. It restricts the deployment of force. It does not matter if you have 500 M1 Abrams tanks if the road is only wide enough for two. The column stretches out for miles, becoming a stationary target. North Korean doctrine relies heavily on this topographical reality. They have pre-sighted thousands of artillery pieces and mortars on every major road, bridge, and valley floor leading north from the demilitarized zone. This brings us to the specific mathematics of the artillery threat, often referred to as the Sea of Fire. The sheer density of tube artillery and multiple rocket launch systems situated along the Kaesong Heights is unparalleled in the history of warfare. Intelligence estimates suggest North Korea maintains approximately 6,000 artillery systems within range of the Greater Seoul area. However, the danger is not just the number of guns. It is their position. These are not batteries sitting in open fields covered by camouflage nets. These are hardened artillery sites, or HARTs. A HARTS emplacement is typically dug into the reverse slope of a mountain. The gun, often a 170mm Coxswain self-propelled gun or a 240mm rocket launcher, is housed inside a granite tunnel. To fire, the gun rolls out on rails, delivers its payload, and immediately retracts back into the mountain behind blast-proof steel doors. The exposure time is measured in seconds. For an invading force, this presents an almost unsolvable targeting problem. Counter-battery radar can detect where the shell came from, but by the time a counterstrike arrives, the enemy gun is already under 100 feet of rock. To destroy these sites requires precision bunker-busting munitions for every single emplacement, of which there are thousands. The logistical expenditure required to neutralize the artillery threat one by one would deplete coalition ammunition stockpiles within days, all while the shelling of civilian centers continues. Furthermore, the logistical footprint of an invading army is massive, and in North Korea it would be remarkably fragile. A modern U.S. armored division requires hundreds of thousands of gallons of fuel per day. In Iraq, fuel tankers could drive off-road to resupply the spearhead. In North Korea, the terrain dictates that supply trucks must use the same narrow, winding roads as the combat units. If the North Korean Engineering Corps blows a single bridge or induces a landslide in a mountain pass, tactics they drill for constantly, the entire invasion force grinds to a halt. A stalled army in a valley is not an attacking force, it is a target. We must also consider the density of the defensive network. The demilitarized zone is often called the most heavily fortified border on Earth, but that phrase has lost its impact through repetition. We need to visualize what that actually means. It is not just a fence. It is a 4-kilometer deep belt of overlapping minefields, tank traps, razor wire, and automated machine gun nests, backed by a defense-in-depth strategy that extends all the way to Pyongyang. The North Korean doctrine is aware they cannot defeat the United States Air Force in the sky. Instead, they have moved their war underground. Defectors in satellite imagery have confirmed the existence of a massive network of subterranean tunnels. These are not simple Viet Cong-style spider holes. These are reinforced concrete tunnels capable of moving trucks, troops, and supplies beneath the mountains, completely invisible to thermal imaging and satellite reconnaissance. An invasion force could secure the surface of a sector, believing it to be clear, only to have thousands of North Korean infantry emerge from tunnel exits behind their lines hours later. This turns the entire country into a porous battlefield where there is no front line and no safe rear area. The psychological and physical toll of clearing these tunnels would be reminiscent of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific Theater in World War II, but on a continental scale. The United States military excels at destruction of visible targets. It relies on the kill chain: find, fix, track, target, engage, assess. But North Korea has engineered a battle space designed to break this chain at the find and fix stages. You cannot hit what you cannot see, and you cannot secure what you can bypass. The invasion would not be a lightning strike. It would be a slow, grinding siege against a fortress built into the earth itself. The historical context of this defense is crucial. This fortress mentality is not paranoia. It is the result of the lessons learned during the Korean War of the 1950s. During that conflict, the U.S. Air Force bombed North Korea until there were effectively no targets left standing. They learned that to survive American air power, they had to become part of the land. For 70 years, the entire state apparatus has been focused on a single engineering project: making the country invasion-proof. They have sacrificed their economy, their infrastructure, and their population's standard of living to purchase this security. When we look at the logistics of invasion, we are looking at a math problem that returns a negative value. The resources required to secure the peninsula, neutralize the artillery, clear the tunnels, and occupy the cities would require a force size larger than the peak deployment in Vietnam and Iraq combined. And this calculation does not even factor in the nuclear variable. Even strictly within the realm of conventional warfare, the cost of entry is too high. The North Korean leadership knows this. They rely on the fact that the United States operates on a cost-benefit analysis. As long as the cost of invasion remains higher than the tolerance of the American public and the South Korean government, the regime remains secure. The invasion is impossible not because the U.S. lacks the firepower, but because the geography and the preparation of the North render that firepower inefficient. The mountains do not care about air superiority. But the true nightmare isn't the geography itself, it is what the regime has buried inside it. There is a specific mathematical variable that halts all invasion plans before they reach the drafting table, and it involves a casualty calculation that no Western democracy can politically survive. In the first 60 minutes of a conflict, before the United States Air Force can complete its first sortie cycle, conservative estimates suggest that over 200,000 conventional artillery shells will impact the Seoul metropolitan area. This is not a war scenario. It is an execution of a hostage population on an industrial scale. The strategy relies on the concept of the tyranny of proximity. The demilitarized zone is less than 30 miles from Seoul, a megacity with a population density nearly double that of New York City. North Korea has spent 70 years turning the Kaesong Heights and the mountain ranges north of the DMZ into the most heavily fortified artillery position in human history. We are not talking about mobile guns sitting in open fields waiting to be struck by a drone. We are talking about HARTS, hardened artillery sites. These are deep bunker emplacements dug into the reverse slopes of granite mountains, protected by blast doors capable of withstanding tactical nuclear yields. The logistics of neutralizing these sites renders modern air superiority frustratingly inefficient. A North Korean Coxswain 170mm self-propelled gun does not stay exposed. The blast doors open, the gun rolls out on a rail system, fires a rapid volley, and retracts back into the mountain before the shell even hits the ground. The doors close. By the time a U.S. counter-battery radar detects the trajectory and calculates the origin point, the target is already behind 50 feet of solid rock. To destroy a single gun, an airstrike must achieve a direct hit on the blast doors or collapse the mountain itself. There are an estimated 6,000 of these artillery systems aimed at the south. The mathematics of suppression simply do not work. The United States does not have enough aircraft to target 6,000 hardened sites simultaneously in the first hour. This saturation strategy creates a specific tactical dilemma known as the Iron Dome fallacy. There is a common belief that missile defense systems can shield a city from this level of aggression, but missile defense is designed to intercept high-value, low-volume projectiles. It is a system based on quality interception. North Korea's strategy is based on quantity saturation. When 4,000 rockets are fired in a single volley, accompanied by thousands of artillery shells which are too small and too numerous to intercept, the defense grid is instantly overwhelmed. The interceptors run out of ammunition in minutes, leaving the city naked to the remaining 90% of the barrage. The resulting devastation in Seoul would not look like modern precision warfare. It would look like Stalingrad, but with skyscrapers. The collapse of glass-faced high-rises creates a secondary weapon, falling debris. In a city where 25 million people live stacked on top of one another, the collapse of infrastructure kills more people than the explosions themselves. The panic alone, clogging the limited bridges across the Han River, would create a logistical bottleneck that freezes all military movement. The South Korean army would be forced to conduct combat operations while navigating a sea of millions of fleeing refugees, effectively neutralizing their mobility advantage. If you find this analysis of logistical constraints valuable and want to see more breakdowns of military doctrine that the news cycle ignores, your support helps keep this research independent. Beyond the conventional artillery lies the second layer of the invasion deterrent, the chemical asymmetry. Planners in the Pentagon operate under the assumption that a regime facing imminent collapse and invasion will have zero incentive to withhold weapons of mass destruction. North Korea possesses one of the largest stockpiles of chemical agents in the world, estimated at anywhere between 2,500 and 5,000 tons. This stockpile includes VX nerve agent and sarin gas. Unlike nuclear weapons, which are complex to maintain and launch, chemical shells are low-tech and can be fired from the same standard artillery pieces already targeted at Seoul. The wind patterns on the Korean peninsula typically blow from the northwest to the southeast. A coordinated chemical barrage wouldn't just kill, it would create an area denial zone that persists for days or weeks. An invading force cannot simply march through a cloud of persistent nerve agents. They must operate in MOPP-4 protective gear, heavy rubberized suits that degrade combat efficiency by 50% and cause heat exhaustion within hours. Decontamination logistics would consume the entire rear echelon of the invasion force. You would need thousands of specialized trucks just to wash the vehicles, let alone treat the hundreds of thousands of civilian casualties suffocating in the subway stations where they sought shelter. This brings us to the ground invasion itself. Let's assume the US and South Korean forces manage to suppress the artillery and navigate the chemical fallout. They then face the challenge of the subterranean theater. The North Korean military has constructed an underground network that rivals the complexity of a small nation's entire highway system. Defectors have confirmed the existence of underground fortresses, entire divisions housed in bunker complexes capable of sustaining operations for months without surfacing. Clearing these tunnels is the most manpower-intensive form of warfare known to man. Technology confers almost no advantage underground. GPS does not work, radios fail, night vision is useless in the dust-choked darkness of a firefight. It becomes a battle of attrition, fought with flamethrowers and grenades at point-blank range. The U.S. military estimates that securing the tunnel network would require a troop density ratio of roughly 20-1. Given the size of the North Korean active duty and reserve forces, the invading coalition would need to commit over 1 million troops just to secure the main supply routes. And this is where the logistics of occupation become the ultimate failure point. The North Korean population has been psychologically conditioned for 70 years to view Americans not as liberators, but as literal demons. The insurgency potential is absolute. In Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. faced insurgencies from a fraction of the population. In North Korea, the state has armed and trained a paramilitary reserve force estimated at nearly 6 million people. Every village is a fortified position. Every mountain pass is a potential ambush point prepared decades in advance. There's no winning hearts and minds when the population has no frame of reference for the outside world. The logistical burden of occupying a nation where the water, power, and food systems have totally collapsed, while fighting a fanatical insurgency in mountainous terrain during a chemical winter, breaks the calculus of military capability. It ceases to be a war and becomes a black hole for resources. The United States could theoretically win the initial battles, destroying the Korean People's Army in the field. But the invasion fails because the definition of victory requires a stable end state, and the mathematics of the North Korean collapse ensures that stability is mathematically impossible to achieve. The cost of the invasion is not measured in dollars, but in the complete disintegration of the regional economy and a humanitarian catastrophe that would displace 20 million people. The invasion fails not because the initial assault is impossible, but because the definition of victory requires a stable end state, and the mathematics of the North Korean collapse ensures that stability is mathematically impossible to achieve. The cost of the invasion is not measured in dollars, but but in the complete disintegration of the regional economy and a humanitarian catastrophe that would displace 20 million people. But displacement is manageable. Armed resistance is not. You assume the collapse of the regime means the end of the fighting, but the mathematics of insurgency suggests the opposite. The fall of Pyongyang is merely the starting gun for a war that could last 50 years. Consider the sheer density of the threat environment. We are not talking about a disorganized militia. We are talking about the worker-peasant Red Guards, a paramilitary force estimated at over 5 million personnel. Even if we assume a 90% surrender rate, an optimistic variable given the level of lifelong ideological indoctrination, that leaves 500,000 active combatants melting into the civilian population. For context, at the height of the insurgency in Iraq, coalition forces faced roughly 20 to 30,000 insurgents. The North Korean scenario presents a hostile force 20 times larger, operating in terrain that is infinitely more forgiving to the defender than the open deserts of the Middle East. The geography of North Korea is a fortress designed by nature and perfected by paranoia. 80% of the landmass is mountainous, riddled with thousands of miles of subterranean tunnels, bunkers, and artillery positions that have been dug over the last 70 years. An occupying force would not be patrolling streets, they would be hunting ghosts in a three-dimensional labyrinth. Every valley becomes a kill zone. Every mountain pass becomes a choke point. The United States Army Field Manual on Counterinsurgency suggests a troop-to-population ratio of 20 counterinsurgents for every 1,000 residents to maintain basic order. In a nation of 25 million people, the occupation force required just to police the streets, not to fight a war but simply to police, would exceed 500,000 soldiers. That is more than the entire active-duty personnel of the United States Army. This brings us to the most volatile variable in the invasion equation, the loose nuclear assets. The moment the central command structure in Pyongyang is severed, the chain of custody for the nuclear arsenal breaks. We are not just looking for silos visible from space. We are looking for mobile erector launchers hidden in caves, warheads mounted on civilian trucks, and tactical nuclear devices dispersed to field commanders with pre-delegated launch authority. The invasion force would instantly pivot from regime change to the most desperate scavenger hunt in human history. Special operations forces would have to secure dozens of sites simultaneously, deep in hostile territory, while under fire from the remnants of the People's Army. If a single commander, facing the end of his world, decides to detonate a tactical device to halt an American advance, or if a single warhead is smuggled out of the country to a non-state actor, the invasion is a strategic failure of global proportions. If this analysis of hidden geopolitical mechanics helps you see the strategic board more clearly, subscribing ensures you don't miss the next deep dive into the logistics of power. The danger escalates further when we look north across the Yalu River. The invasion of North Korea cannot be simulated in a vacuum because the People's Republic of China has a non-negotiable red line. Beijing views North Korea as a necessary buffer zone, a physical shield keeping American troops off its border. In 1950, when U.S. forces pushed too close to the Yalu, China entered the war, pushing the Allies back and freezing the conflict for 7 decades. The geopolitical calculus has not changed. China will not tolerate a unified American-allied Korea on its doorstep. In the event of a U.S. invasion and a subsequent regime collapse, China would almost certainly intervene militarily. Their objective would be to secure a buffer zone in the northern provinces, ostensibly to manage the refugee crisis and secure loose nuclear weapons, but in reality to prevent the U.S. from reaching the border. This creates a nightmare scenario: American and Chinese forces racing toward each other in a chaotic, fog-of-war environment. One miscalculation, one accidental engagement between superpowers, and a regional intervention spirals into a global conflict. The risk of unintended escalation between nuclear-armed powers makes the invasion untenable before the first boot hits the ground. However, the final nail in the coffin of any invasion plan is not military, but economic. The financial mathematics of reunification following a violent collapse are apocalyptic. We often look to the reunification of Germany as a model, but that comparison is dangerously misleading. East Germany was an industrial state with a functioning population. North Korea is an economic black hole. The infrastructure is archaic, the power grid is non-existent outside the capital, and the population suffers from chronic malnutrition and a complete lack of modern skills. South Korea, currently the world's 10th largest economy, would have to absorb this collapse. Estimates for the cost of reunification range from $2 to $5 trillion over 30 years. This is not just a budget line item, it is an economic suicide pact. The sudden integration of 25 million impoverished people would shatter the South Korean social safety net, collapse its currency, and likely drag the entire global supply chain down with it. Major conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai, which supply the world with semiconductors and electronics, would face an existential crisis as the national focus shifted entirely to the black hole in the north. The global economy, dependent on South Korean stability, would enter a depression. Therefore, the paradox of the North Korean situation reveals itself. The regime stands not because it is strong, but because its collapse is too expensive for the world to afford. The United States maintains the status quo not out of fear of the North Korean army, but out of fear of the victory condition. Winning the war means owning the wreckage. It means occupying a mountainous insurgency for decades. It means securing loose nuclear weapons while risking World War III with China. It means asking the South Korean economy to commit suicide. The invasion of North Korea remains a theoretical exercise because the price of success is higher than the cost of containment. The artillery stays pointed at Seoul, the DMZ remains the most heavily militarized border on Earth, and the regime survives, not because it is invincible, but because it has successfully made itself too toxic to touch. In the cold calculus of geopolitics, a frozen conflict is always preferable to a nuclear meltdown.